In this video, we're going to talk about a new enhancement to BMC AMI Change Manager for DB2 that became available in April 2023. And that is the ability to have Z-Advisor dashboards that display data that comes from Change Manager. I'm Dave Skipper, Product Manager for Change Manager, and with me is Frank Rhodes, our Solutions Architect, who'll be showing a demo in a little bit. First, let's look at Change Manager for DB2. Change Manager works on the principle that you have a source environment that has a number of changes in it, and you want to move those changes to a target environment. Change Manager compares the two environments, understands the changes, and then builds the job streams, the DDL, the SQL, the control statements needed to move those changes from the source environment to the target environment. This allows you to validate changes in a test environment, for example, before moving it to QA, and then from QA to pre-production, and then on up into production, knowing that all the changes you've made and tested along the way keep moving along. It also has the ability to then roll those changes forward into multiple production environments if you want to replicate the changes, or if a mistake was made, you can roll the changes back and start over again. BMC AMI Z-Advisor is an analytics solution that provides a view of mainframe development and operational behaviors and shows key performance indicators around those behaviors. It takes data from other mainframe products, uses machine learning to analyze that data, and then produces a series of dashboards that show you the data, and using those dashboards you can measure and improve your organization's quality, velocity, and efficiency. You can see what features of the products you're using, see what features you're not using, and understand how to better utilize the products you have to more efficiently manage your mainframe. This new enhancement allows BMC AMI Change Manager to provide data to BMC AMI Z-Advisor. The data that we provide has been collected in the product history tables inside of Change Manager. And because those product history tables have been around for a number of years, there's a lot of information in those history tables that can be immediately provided. That allows you to start seeing trends, past activity, and get information in Z-Advisor immediately without waiting for a number of months of collecting new information and that sort of thing. You have historical information that you can use right away. Z-Advisor then takes that information, analyzes it, and displays it in a set of management level visibility dashboards. This allows both the management at your organization and DBAs to see what features of Change Manager they're using, how they're using them, things maybe you're not using that you should be using, compare usage between various areas in your organization, and identify areas that you can use Change Manager better to more effectively and efficiently manage your mainframe environment. So with that background, let's go to Frank Rhodes and he'll show you this in operation.
Hello everyone, my name is Frank Rhodes and I'm the Solution Architect for the BMC Administrative Products for DB2. What I'm going to be showing you today is Change Manager's integration into the Z-Advisor product. What we did with Change Manager is we had a lot of data that had been saved away in the Change Manager product tables for years as our products are using it. The different components they use, all of the different usage information would be saved. We're extracting that information and sending it over to Z-Advisor so that it can now be displayed in this nice dashboard that you're seeing here today. Some of the items that you're seeing here are the different usage of the Change Manager product. You can see the total number of comparisons run there on the left-hand side. Over on the far right-hand side, you can see the total number of baselines taken. How many snapshots had you done of your application schema definitions? You can see that there. And as I move my mouse here, you can see the number of work IDs completed. In this example, you're seeing 460 work IDs that were completed, and they took on average 30 minutes to complete. That is probably a very valid value that you would expect to see for a development subsystem. If you want to make changes, you go into the product, say what you want to do, implement those changes so that you can take advantage of them immediately. If this were a production subsystem, these numbers would probably be different. Average duration on a production subsystem would probably be more towards 5-6 days versus 30 minutes. Mainly because on a production subsystem, you are going to be implementing your changes based more upon a schedule. So on a production subsystem, you may want to make your changes on Monday, but you may not actually be able to roll them out until Friday or Saturday when you actually hit your maintenance window for your particular application. The next two values that are displayed here are the number of modified objects versus the number of evaluated objects. So what this is, modified objects are the number of objects you actually asked Change Manager to make changes for. Number of tables that you're trying to add columns to, number of indexes that you're creating. If you're dropping an alias or a table space, those would all be viewed modified objects. The evaluated objects are the number of objects that Change Manager actually went out and analyzed for you to figure out what it would take to implement the changes that you requested. So this just kind of gives you a return on investment of what Change Manager is doing for you. In this here, I wanted to make 20,000 modifications, but I had to go out and Change Manager actually analyzed 360,000 different objects in order to implement those changes. If I didn't have Change Manager, I would have had to have done all that research myself. So I'm now going to scroll down and show some of the other information on this screen. So here, I'm going to talk about some of the different numbers related to product adoption. You can see here the number of users that have been using Change Manager. You can also see who some of those top users are. How many times did they get into the product on a regular basis? Another item that we have here is Change Manager is the back-end product driven from our DevOps for DB2 solution. So you can see about 25% of the executions of Change Manager were actually driven from our DevOps product doing testing. And then the other 75% were driven by the Change Manager team directly in a native mode. Here you can see the actual versions of the Change Manager product and of the DevOps for DB2 product. You can see how the versions change over time. You can see if for the DevOps product what our Fixpacks numbers are. And for the both products, we will eventually start seeding what the SPE level is. So they'll give you an idea of the level of maintenance you have applied to these systems. And here on the left, you can actually see our feature adoption. There's a number of different components built into Change Manager, and this lets you see how many users are taking advantage of those components. CM Pilot is a very important one to see, because if you see a high adoption of CM Pilot, that means you're doing automation via Change Manager. CM Pilot is our automation tool. So it's very important to see good numbers there, because it means you're taking advantage and you're trying to streamline your processes better. I will scroll down and show you the DB2 subsystem information. Here, I'm only connected to one subsystem at the moment. I'm dealing with DEJM, but you can actually see the different levels of maintenance for DEJM. You can see it went, we have tracked when it went to version 12, 500 for new function mode. You can see when we hit 509 and 510, those different function levels. So let's go ahead and take a look at the analysis dashboard. Here on the analysis dashboard, you're seeing very specific information for your actual analysis runs. You're seeing those same numbers that we showed you from the overview screen. The 20,000 objects you wanted to change, the 360,000 objects that we looked up for you. So for every one object you want to change, we were looking up over 18 objects to actually implement those changes. And if you scroll down here, you can actually see information about what are the objects that you're dealing with. So you can see here the number of explicit changes that were requested. So for the number of tables, you can see there was close to 4,000 tables that I wanted to modify, but on the bottom number, you can see we actually did an evaluation of, instead of 4,000, almost 34,000. So it shows you the breakdown of those modified objects versus the breakdown of the actual evaluated objects as well. So I will scroll down, go here. So now this is the number of binds that were evaluated in order to implement your changes. As you know, DB2 applications, if you make schema changes, you tend to invalidate the packages that your application used to access that schema. The Change Manager product will go out, determine which packages will be invalidated by your schema changes, and rebind those packages for you. So in this example, for the number of work IDs that we processed, on average, every work ID was performing about 62 binds of packages to ensure that your application would be fully functional after you implement your changes. So here's some utility information. As you can see here, you can see the number of different utilities that the Change Manager product generated in order to implement the changes that you requested. You're seeing 665 reorgs. You're seeing a very high number of unloads and loads, the number of copies and run stats. And you can see the numbers of these that were done for the Change Manager product directly and the number that were driven via the DevOps front end for the Change Manager product. Now, one thing to note, these numbers here, we're doing a lot of testing. So with our testing, we're testing out the different utilities. At a customer, I would expect the reorg counts to be far higher than the unload and load counts because you want to be taking advantage of online schema changes. If you were to see numbers like this, it'd be concerning because whenever you have an unload and a load of a table, that means the application that's using that table is going to experience an outage. If you're doing a reorg in order to implement your schema changes, those can be done in an online mode and you reduce the potential outage that a customer will actually experience for their application. Now, we're listing out all the different utility types here across the screen, but if I were to scroll down, you can actually see detailed information for each of the different utility types. I'm not going to go into all of them, but here you can see specific information related to the reorg utility. Of the reorgs that we took, the majority of the reorgs that we ran via the product were done with IBM reorg. We did testing with AME reorg as well as reorg plus. Another thing to note, we even track the information when you say, I don't want to be concerned with data for this particular schema change. In those instances, we're not going to generate utilities for you, but we track the fact that we suggested that you should run a utility and you asked us not to. So the next dashboard that we're going to look at is going to be the compare dashboard. As I mentioned earlier, compare is one of the components of Change Manager. It allows you to compare two sets of schema definitions to find out exactly what the differences are. So in here, you're seeing that we ran a little over 2,000 compares. If you look here on this particular screen, you can see of those 2,000, 440 were the same. About 20% of those compares matched up as equal, which is, it's good to know there's not a problem with them being equal. It means you have the two environments in sync, which is a positive thing. And then you can see about 80% of these show differences. So we were comparing objects for compare 1 to compare 2. And on average, we found differences about 76% of the time. So that what that means is about 76% of the objects being compared were going to have to be modified, and we tracked those modifications that were needed. This is showing information about the different types of comparisons, the inputs that our comparison engine takes. Many times we'll accept a DDL file as input. As you can see here for compare 2, we had like 54% of the runs were using a DDL file as input. And then for compare 1, you can see the majority of the time for compare 1, we were actually using the local catalog. And you can see the colors there for the remote catalog, the colors for if we were actually taking it via baseline or via work list. If with this graph below, this is actually showing the relationship of compare 2 to compare 1. So the majority of those DDL files were run against the catalog for compare 1 and compare 2. But you can see here, some of the DDL files were run against other DDL files. Some of the DDL files here were run against the remote catalog. So you see all of that information. If you look here in this table, all of that same information is broken down in the table where you can see exactly what compare one was, what was compared to, and how many of those comparisons you took did you do for each one of these. This is the work ID dashboard. This is specific information for the work IDs that are created on the subsystem. I mentioned earlier, work IDs are kind of like a pipeline. It is a request to implement a change to your DB2 schema definitions. It may be for one table, it could be for 200 tables. It all depends on what you ask the product to do for you. So in here, you can see the number of work IDs that are completed, the average duration, as I mentioned earlier. But if we scroll down, you can see some additional information about these work IDs. You can see the actual status of the different work IDs. As I mentioned, you can see here, there was 460 work IDs completed. But if you look up here, you can see 609 work IDs were actually analyzed. That means you went out, analyzed the work IDs, figured out what was needed in order to implement your changes. But as I mentioned, this is one of our own internal systems for testing Change Manager. In these instances, we generated those work lists, but we didn't necessarily execute all of them. That's why these don't show as completed. Looking here, you're actually able to see how the information was put into the work ID. If you have specification listed, that means you went into the product's user interface through its UI, through the dialogues, and you specified whatever changes you wanted to do. If you were using import, that means you were in all likelihood either importing a DDL file or a CDL file, that change definition file that gets generated by compare, importing that in. I would expect at customer sites, we would actually look for higher numbers on the import side because customers are trying to automate more and more. If you're having to manually do all of this via specification, that hurts the idea of doing automation. Using import and to push your changes forward is a far more automated fashion, and it would allow for faster response time in order to implement those changes. And then down here, again, you can see the top work ID owners, the different people that are using it, and how many work IDs they have done. And then what this is showing you here, as you can see on this particular diagram, this is the number of work IDs that were run using full recovery baselines. Now, as you look at this, you can see that the majority of these were not taking advantage of full recovery baselines. The majority of the work IDs were just regular work IDs. About 1% were taking advantage of full recovery baselines. At a customer site, I would imagine for a dev site, the numbers to be kind of what I have on the screen. They're going to be very low. You're not going to be taking those full recovery baselines. But if you are in a production subsystem where you're implementing schema changes to production, and if you encounter a problem, you need to be able to fall back quickly and safely. In that type of environment, you would look to see that this full recovery baseline be a bit higher number, 20, 30, 40%, maybe even 100% potentially, if that's what you feel is necessary for you to protect your application in case a problem occurs and you want to back those changes out for whatever reason. Could be a schema problem. It could be just an application problem or a scheduling type problem. But for whatever reason, if you use a full recovery baseline, you can back out all of your schema changes and restore all of your data to how it was before you implemented any changes. The next dashboard we're going to look at is the baselines dashboard. And here we're showing you information about the baselines. You can see we took 157 baselines. Of those 157 baselines, 101 of them were based upon a unique profile. That means you have at least 101 baselines that are dealing with different application data. The one thing to note, that leaves those 56 other baselines. That means that for some of these baseline profiles, you may have taken multiple version snapshots of your application schema. Maybe every time you make a change to your application schema, you take a new baseline so that you can go back and do comparisons and you can track exactly what you're changing as far as your application schema is concerned. Now with this, you can see we took 157 baselines, but there was over 8,000 objects. So we took 157 baselines. There was quite a few objects entailed the makeup of those 187 baselines. So if you look here, you can actually see the different object types that we were baselining. These are all the different objects that we were saving that information away. If I put my mouse over one of these columns, you can actually see in this, we were dealing with quite a few, about 664 table spaces, 688 tables. You're seeing the specific information, how many of those different object types were saved away with those baselines. With baselines, there are two types. There are catalog-based baselines and DDL-based baselines. Most customer sites, it's going to depend upon how you're using the product. With us for development here, you're able to see that on average, we were taking about 28% of our baselines were actually DDL, with the majority of them coming from the catalog. And then I was mentioning full recovery baselines earlier. Looking at this gives you some information on that. Out of all of the baselines that we have taken on this subsystem, about 6% of those were full recovery baselines, where we were taking a full snapshot of the schema and of the product data. Let me get there. Baselines are based upon baseline profiles. The baseline profiles where you tell the product what you want to take a snapshot of. So here you can see we have quite a few baseline profiles created. We have about 9% of our baseline profiles are based upon a migrate profile on the other side. And we just break down some of the different information related to the baseline profiles. I mentioned earlier some of our profiles had multiple baselines potentially taken. So you can see here's one baseline where there are 9 baselines that have been taken. The next one has 7 different baselines that have been taken. So it gives you that information to let you know how much historical data are you maintaining for your application. The last dashboard that we're going to look at is going to be migrate profiles. Here on the migrate profile screen, you see information about all of the migrate profiles that we're taking for the subsystem. As you can see, we have 1,300 migrate profiles here, but then we also break down how do you actually have those migrate profiles defined, how many of them are using scope rules, how many of those migrate profiles are using change rules, and then additionally, are you taking advantage of the locations capability of the product? And this is where we could potentially do migrate profiles to generate out to multiple locations. So all of this different information is saved in our product tables, and we're displaying it here so you can look at and determine exactly how are you using Change Manager, what features of Change Manager are you taking advantage of. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that this demo was informational for you. Thank you very much.